I want to begin with a personal confession. I am a devoted admirer of Elliott. Truly, Elliott waves were the first thing that drew me into technical analysis. They weren't just another method, they were a way of thinking. In my view, Ralph Nelson Elliott is one of the foundational pillars of this field. A man who worked with nothing more than a pencil and a graph notebook. No colorful charts, no indicators, no advanced platforms. And yet managed to identify logic and structure. That even today, with all our computing power, algorithms, and data, we are still trying to fully grasp. There is genius in Elliott's simplicity. Something clean, sharp, and deeply human. And because of that, what I am about to present here does not come from a place of dismissal, but from one of profound respect. I am not certain whether what I am doing is a correction of Elliott's work, or simply an adaptation of his theory to a different world. A world where time behaves differently, liquidity behaves differently, speed behaves differently, and the market itself is no longer the same pool Elliott was swimming in. It's possible that he wasn't wrong. It's possible that he was simply observing truth through the tools and conditions of his era. And I am swimming in a different pool. That creates a very real ambivalence for me. On one hand, Elliott is a hero of mine. On the other, I find myself compelled to point at a place where our modern understanding may be able to go one step further. Not out of arrogance, not out of a desire to improve his work, but out of loyalty to the very principle Elliott himself believed in, that the market is chaos that has rules, and that structure precedes interpretation. So if there is a change here, it is not a rebellion. It is a continuation. And if there is criticism, it is delivered with reverence, and with enormous respect for one of the thinkers, without whom I likely wouldn't be here at all. Elliott Wave 2.0. What you are about to hear is not a modification of classical Elliott Wave. It is not an improvement. It is not an alternative count. And it is not a reinterpretation of rules. It is a structural reframing of how price actually moves. Elliott Wave 2.0 does not begin with 5 waves. It begins with cycles. The first principle. Every 3-wave structure is a complete cycle. Not a fragment. Not a correction. Not a pause inside something larger. A cycle. Movement. Rotation. Continuation. This is what has historically been labeled ABC. And that label was correct. The mistake was never in identifying ABC. The mistake was in assuming that ABC was secondary. It is not. ABC is the fundamental unit of market behavior. What a cycle really is. A cycle is not trend versus correction. A cycle is a closed energetic loop. The first wave projects energy into price. The second wave rotates that energy into a different dimension. The third wave resolves the interaction and carries price forward. The so-called correction is not opposition. It is rotation. Energy is not lost. It is processed. Price does not reverse. It reorients. This is why every 3-wave structure completes itself. Nothing is left open. Nothing is unfinished. Cycles are atomic. There is no such thing as an incomplete cycle. There is no such thing as a wave that is too small to matter. At every observable scale, micro, meso, macro, price resolves itself in cycles of 3. Each cycle is structurally whole. From cycles to expansion, trends do not exist independently. They emerge. When 2 3-wave cycles enter into symbiosis, a higher-order structure forms. This interaction produces what is perceived as a 5-wave movement. Not because 5 waves are fundamental, but because 2 cycles overlap and share a central axis. The third wave of the first cycle and the first wave of the second cycle collapse into a single structural pivot. This pivot is not a number. It is a point of maximum coherence. The expansion wave. A 5-wave expansion is not a unit. It is a consequence. It is the visible result of 2 cycles interacting across scale. This interaction is what Elliott identified, intuitively, without the tools to fully describe its mechanics. Elliott Wave 2.0 makes that mechanism explicit. The diamond structure. Each three-wave cycle forms a diamond. Not visually, structurally. Compression, rotation, resolution. The diamond is not a pattern. It is a decision engine. It represents how price processes uncertainty. Every expansion is built from diamonds. Every macro movement is an arrangement of cycles. The nature of expansion. Not all expansions behave the same. Because not all cycle relationships are the same. There are three and only three expansion states. Expanding expansion. Here, each successive cycle grows larger than the previous one. Energy enters the system. Amplitude increases. Momentum accelerates. Visual symmetry breaks down. This is where 5 waves visually collapse into 3. Not because structure changed, but because resolution failed. This is where classical analysis falsely declares correction. Nothing is correcting. The system is expanding. Stable expansion. Here, cycles remain proportionally balanced. Energy is conserved. Price moves within coherent boundaries. Structure remains readable. Trends persist without distortion. This is not consolidation. This is dynamic equilibrium. Most sustained trends live here. Contracting expansion. Here, cycles compress. Amplitude shrinks. Precision increases. Energy concentrates. This is not an ending pattern. It is a preparatory state. A base condition preceding bifurcation. There are no corrections. There are no corrections in price. There are only cycles completing themselves and interacting across scale. What has been called correction is simply rotational processing of energy within a cycle. Price never rests. Price never negates itself. Fractal resonance. Cycles do not exist in isolation. A microcycle can expand inside a stable macro expansion. But in most cases, dominant microstructure resonates upward and defines macro behavior. This is not interpretation. It is resonance. Structural instability and closure. There is one critical instability condition. When the first cycle expands and the second cycle contracts, the expansion becomes structurally unstable. This does not mark a top. It does not mark a bottom. It marks closure. Wave 5 is not emotional climax. Wave 5 is structural resolution, a point where energy is either released into a new sequence of cycles or trapped into compression. Measurement over interpretation. Elliott Wave 2.0 does not rely on counting. It relies on measurement. Angles of projection. Cycle amplitude relationships. Compression gradients. And one final rule. When the structural boundary of the second cycle breaks, the expansion is complete. No guessing. No relabeling. No alternative counts. Final principle. The market does not move in 5. The market does not move in 3. The market moves in cycles. Cycles combine. Cycles resonate. Cycles change character. 5 waves are not a law. They are an outcome. This is Elliott Wave 2.0. Not a better count. A complete structure.